So welcome everybody, my name is Alberto Cevolini. I'm professor of sociology at the University of Bologna. And today we present Elena Esposito's book, Artificial Communication, How Algorithms Produce Social Intelligence. The book has been printed by MIT Press in the last few months, but I would like to remind you that you may download the book for free because it is available in open access. So feel free to download the book for free. We have two fantastic critics today, and I think that, so that is my expectation. The two critics make the panel even more exciting. But before we start talking about the book, let me remind you that you have maybe 50 minutes. So each of us, so each critic has 50 minutes of presentation, and then Elena has 50 minutes to respond to commentaries, and then we may open the forum, and we have half an hour open forum. So we are open for discussion. Just raise your hand, and I pass you the microphone. And so now, it is a pleasure to introduce Elena Esposito. Elena Esposito is a professor of sociology at Bielefeld University, Germany, and at the University of Bologna, Italy. Elena achieved global fame especially because research in the field of social systems theory. And she has been dealing with a huge number of different topics in the last years for a long time. I just mentioned very few topics, social memory, paradoxes of fashion, so paradoxes that everybody tries to be original through imitation. And also, she was dealing with financial markets. She wrote a book on the future of futures. It was not simply on the financial crisis, it was rather on money as a matter of time. And also, she was dealing with the improbability of probability calculation. So a huge variety of different topics, but the background is always social system theory. And now Elena Esposito is a principal investigator of a research project on the future of prediction. The project received a European Research Council grant, and the project tries to investigate the social consequences of algorithm forecast in three different social fields: medicine, insurance, and policing. And now I would like also to introduce the two critics. Noortje Maurits is professor in science, technology, and society at the University of Warwick. She's also a visiting professor at the University of Siegen in Germany. Her research is basically on SDS issues. Especially, she was dealing with the changing relationship between social science and social life when social science resorted to digital methods. Last book is Digital Sociology. It was published in 2017 by Polity. And she was also dealing with other issues, for instance, the problem of participation in technological society. Professor Akos Rona-Tas doesn't need maybe any presentation, but I just say something about his CV. He was former president of SASE, 2018 and 2019. She is now chief editor of Socio-Economics Review and is professor of sociology at the University of California, San Diego. He extensively investigated social and economic changes in post-communist countries, especially this book on plastic money was a book on the use of credit cards in post-communist countries. We take it for granted that we use credit cards, and that was not so easy in post-communist countries. His current research is now on risk analysis and the role of scientific uncertainty in social prediction. I just mentioned only an article that was published 2020, so 2 years ago, on the topic of predicting the future. That is very close to Elena Esposito's research. right now. The subtitle is Art and Algorithm. So as you may see, we have two fantastic critics who are dealing with very close topics, algorithmic prediction, the future of prediction, the use of algorithm in many different social fields. And now, before I pass the floor to the two critics, I would like to say something about the book we are presenting, Artificial Communication. Well, let's say first, it is almost a commonplace that algorithms are now everywhere in everyday life. We know very well that algorithms are used in many different decision-making processes. They are used in hiring decisions, in legal decisions. For instance, when you have to decide whether or not to parole an inmate. They are used to select advertising on the web. They are used for movie recommendations. They are used to produce lists and also to rank search results when you are using a search engine. So they work also with very complicated mathematical methods. So people speak of deep learning, machine learning, and so on. So they are continuously also fed back with the data. Now that led in the last years to a sort of revival of previous debates about artificial intelligence. So for a lot of people, algorithms are now becoming sort of a thinking machine. And so people are also scared, and so they are not so much comfortable with the idea that we may interact with this kind of artificial intelligence. So that is, let's say, the background. But now, Elena argues that this comparison between artificial intelligence and human intelligence to understand algorithm is misleading. And that is, in my opinion, a turning point in the workbook. Because the matter is not so much that machines did learn to think like human beings. The matter is rather that they learned how to communicate with us, with the human beings, as if they were a communication partner. And that is really the turning point in the workbook. Elena's main hypothesis is that we should try to investigate algorithms not so much as a kind of artificial intelligence, but as a kind of artificial communication. And that implies a shift of focus in research. So to do this, we need a concept of communication. And we need a concept of communication that is strong enough, theoretically strong enough, to understand also algorithm as a kind of communication partner. So that is a challenge. And Elena tries to face the challenge by dealing with a number of topics that you find in the chapters. So for instance, the production list, the use of data visualization, digital profiling, right to be forgotten, and also predicting algorithm. That is not a summarizing of the book. I tried just to give you some insight into the main hypothesis. And now I can pass the floor to the two critics. I suggest the first Noortje, and then Rona-Tas. So Noortje is over you.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss Elena's book also with you, Akos. It is quite a short book that Elena has written, but it very successfully articulates a high-level argument about machine learning and its role in culture and society. Now, I think the book's intended contribution, and perhaps also the way in which it is going to be read most, is as a contribution to interdisciplinary debate. But it can also be read as formulating an intellectual agenda for a sociology of algorithms. And I would like to use my 15 minutes to engage with this agenda and identify some of the elements in it. Because for me, personally, this is what makes the book especially valuable. I think it really contributes to carving out a space for a distinctively social inquiry in the very busy area of AI research. And after I've identified these elements in the agenda, I hope I have some time for a few points of criticism. So, first contribution. The proposed move from a preoccupation with intelligence when it comes to understanding machine learning to a focus on communication. Esposito argues that the label intelligence misrepresents machine learning's operations, as these systems do not seek to understand but to predict. Instead of debating their intelligence, we should recognize that machine learning algorithms today participate in social communication and communication processes across society. Now, as part of this argument, Elena proposes that anthropomorphism must be dislodged from the debate about AI, and that this is indeed should be an important objective of sociology as I read it. I think this is a really crucial point. The debate as to whether machine learning systems are intelligent like humans, are they intelligent like humans, is distracting in a whole number of ways, but including in the way that it distracts us from the highly artificial quality of the interactions that involve algorithms. So this is where I think the critique of anthropomorphism in the understanding of machine learning is so important. It prevents us from affirming the artificiality of the modes of operation of machine learning in society. But a number of questions follows. So first, what do we make of anthropomorphism in relation to machine learning as an empirical phenomenon? So I fully agree that anthropomorphism must be rejected as a premise of a sociology of technology or of AI. But we can nevertheless observe the prevalence of anthropomorphism and indeed of isomorphism between machine learning systems and humans in social life. And this is, I think it's a very powerful reality that we encounter in all manner of ways. Like in my own practice, where with colleagues we're working with large language models and looking into their applicability to analyze Twitter conversations. And one of my colleagues insisted that our researchers code our tweets just like the machine does. So there's a kind of a requirement of isomorphism between how BERT, the model, would code our Twitter data and how then our researchers are asked to code. So how do we deal with this continued prevalence empirically and practically of isomorphism, reverse anthropomorphism? So this brings me to a second related contribution, which is the emphasis not just on stepping away from anthropomorphism, but also an emphasis on artificial communication as what is the empirical unit of analysis, so to speak, if we want to understand machine learning's role in society. I find this notion of artificial communication really very helpful. It helps us dislodge a second philosophical habit, which I think is not a very good sociological habit, which is that of naturalism, so the naturalistic framing of social action, social interaction. So when enthusiasts speak about the new capacities for communication of machine learning systems, they will often emphasize how they act just like social agents. They operate successfully in social life. We don't even notice that they are algorithms. And it produces a kind of a naturalistic framing, as if they were not machines. So here this emphasis on the artificiality of communication is, I think, really crucial. And the book puts forward and clarifies a number of concepts that also give meat or give flesh to this. How do we approach artificial communication? So the notion of virtual contingency, which, and here I think I quote, that it enables us to appreciate the generative character of exchange between data, machines, and social practices in digital settings. And this, again, a quote, allows us to appreciate an unprecedented interweaving between activities of users and generalized references. So machine communication generates new social artifacts, perhaps even sociological artifacts, is the question. So I think these two moves in the book, I think it's clear I'm very enthusiastic about them, also really want to endorse them. There are two other points where I wanted to raise some critical questions in this session. So the first has to do with the individuation of the agencies involved in the operation of machine learning in society. So as Alberto also indicated, Esposito proposes that we approach algorithms as communication partners. And I think this implies that we attribute agency to them, even perhaps of a limited kind. However, I'm not convinced that the algorithm is always the relevant frame in situations involving machine learning. So first, there's the point highlighted in Esposito's notions of virtual contingency, that machine learning works insofar as it is trained on social data. As she puts it, algorithms feed on the dynamics of the web to organize their operations and even themselves. But if algorithms are only as good as the data and the infrastructures that they rely on are, wouldn't it make more sense to refer to them as architectures rather than individuating the algorithm as the agent? Also, I have a concern that a preoccupation with the algorithm risks leaving out of view some of the societal transformations associated with machine learning. So one of the phrases that we hear in the UK is making society AI ready, the notion of AI readiness. Now, this pops up in different domains, but one is in the NHS and NHSX, the sort of digital innovation arm from of the National Health Service, where there's significant investment underway in what are called trusted research environments. So NHS Digital is building infrastructures that will make the health data of the UK population available for compute-intensive analysis, and this to selected commercial partners. Now here, it is not the algorithm as agent, but much more AI as a promise, and AI-driven analysis as an investment proposition that mobilize actors, and that is mobilized to make profound transformative interventions into society, such as formatting the population as a research asset. Second point concerns the attribution of competence and reliability to machine learning systems. So an important premise of the book is that algorithms are pretty good at what they do. So they're good at driving, they're good at chatting, they're good at detecting patterns. And I do see that this is very important and able to shift away from the way in which the abilities of AI are treated in philosophical debate. So are they intelligent? Instead, the idea here is let's stop talking about can they, and let's focus on the more basic tasks that they are already capable of doing, and then see how this unfolds in society. But still, I'm wondering whether we do not need a more symmetrical account that makes room for both the failures, the incompetences, and the competences of machine learning. Here in the Netherlands, but also in the UK, the last several years, we've lived through a number of scandals where machine learning and its misapplication in the public sector resulted in real harm for citizens and asylum seekers whose claims were denied, who were accused of fraud, who received financial and penalties and very, very concrete implications of this kind of failure of machine learning. So I am not going to make the list of points much longer. I've 2 more points. Do we have time for that? Yeah? Okay. So the first is to come back to this question of the algorithm as partner. So what is very interesting, I think, in the book is that it is made clear that to treat the algorithm as a partner is to treat it as something different than an instrument. So there's a passage where Elena speaks of the algorithm as a noisy partner. So this is not just a technology that recedes into the background. And indeed, I think that also invites interesting questions from a sociology of technology and also a philosophy of technology that often has been preoccupied with this sort of taken for grantedness or the receding into the background of technology as what makes it very hard to also engage critically with questions of technology. So this notion of the noisy partner would be interesting to discuss more. This is not just a reliable tool the way Elena presents the algorithm. But still, giving these points around lack of competence, we can ask whether how this notion of communication partner, how it limits us in capturing the ways in which machine learning participates in social life. So machine learning systems make us fill in forms. They make us dumb down our questions so that they can understand us. They make us do our conversation analysis, in my particular case, in a more stupid manner, possibly. They make us walk down straight lines without making unpredictable moves when navigating a border, for instance. So if it is the case that machine learning makes us do all these things, and also when they operate on the assumption, as Esposito puts it, that information can replace understanding, are we not also here encountering once again the old 20th century phenomenon of bureaucracy rather than communication? And how do we decide when which frame is appropriate? So I think these different points they amount to kind of a question and a call, I guess, on my part to expand this notion, this conception of the artificiality of the interactions and exchanges that machine learning participates in. So just as there are problems with anthropomorphizing machines, there are sometimes problems with socializing them. In both cases, we attribute capacities to machines that define them as competent. What if machine learning, in some cases, threatens the quality of interactions? What if it weakens conditions for achieving social interactivity? What if it sometimes produces configurations in society which encourage social life to simply move elsewhere? Yeah, so this can be taken up in 2 ways, and I'm really nearing my end. So is it, if I'm saying that the focus on artificiality and the shift away from intelligence are the moves in which Elena really opens up a space, should we also look at artificial sociality and not just at artificial communication? This may also have consequences for the type of vocabulary and the categories that we bring to the analysis of machine learning in social life. So at some points, the book takes up formulations from the field that self-identifies as social physics, where there are statements that say, for instance, algorithms base their calculations on what people actually do. I think in those kind of statements, there's a sort of implicit naturalizations at work, arguably, where, for instance, the data that can be gleaned from the web is equated with what people actually do. But of course, a click and a doing are not a people actually doing is not exactly the same thing. So yes, artificialities abound, and I'm really happy that we can have a conversation about this book, which makes like a wonderful argument, but also for me throws up all the right questions. So thank you.
Rona-Tas, it's over you.
Okay, so let me begin. I apologize. I think that would have a lobby. You will see people appearing behind me, but I hope that won't be distracting. So, reading Esposito's book is a bit like listening in on a pleasant, thoughtful conversation on arguably the most interesting cultural topic today, the way technology is transforming our culture. In this short and lucid book, Esposito conjures up subtle, complex, and deeply philosophical arguments with elegant ease, without the fog of jargon or the defensive armor of convoluted sentence structures that all too frequently mark humanistic reflections on technological change. This book does exactly what it should. It elicits reflection and discussion. The book is essentially 5 essays, each presented as a chapter, bookended by one chapter in the front and one at the end, that carry the theoretical ambitions of the book, with the headline on the cover of the book and the title, Artificial Communication and Not Artificial Intelligence. I found the essays insightful and thought-provoking, while the theoretical frame, by and large, unpersuasive. The good news is that the essays do not the least require the support of the theoretical scaffolding. The theory here is more like a picture frame held up between an interesting and rich landscape and the perambulating hiker. There are things to see within and without the frame. Moreover, the vista shifts as we go, so the rectangle soon fades from our vision. The first essay is about lists and their growing prominence in our culture. Esposito points out that algorithms rely heavily on lists, and lists were at the birth of written communication many millennia ago. Lists decontextualize, she observes, as does writing on any form or any form of abstract thought. Yet the level of abstraction a list represents can vary a lot. It is not just whether the items are ordered, but also whether they represent unique items, as the list of the panelists of this panel, or provide categories into which multiple items can be placed, a list of themes at this conference, for instance. Most lists are rosters of categories, abstractions, and it is categorization or classification is where algorithms do most of their mischief. Esposito also asserts that algorithms calculate without abstraction. This is a surprising claim. Calculation is impossible without abstraction. The simplest calculation requires abstracting and classifying or measuring a particular quality of items in the natural world. Quality and quantity presuppose comparison and abstraction, which is why most of us find math bewildering. What is specific to calculation, and algorithmic calculation even more, is that the manipulation of the abstractions is mechanical. It follows a set of very explicit rules. Esposito's insight that lists decontextualize and shape our thinking is a very important one. Yet as anyone who ever used PowerPoint will tell you, lists also recontextualize, place items in a new set of relationships. This is why we use PowerPoint, but PowerPoint also reveals the limiting quality of lists, and it is linearity. It is linear, just like most reading is linear. Prezi, actually it's a Hungarian product, PowerPoint's nemesis, unsuccessful nemesis, recognized this limitation and developed a software that dumps the linearity of lists and builds presentation around not succession, but the whole and part relationship. This takes us to the second essay on reading images. Images as representations do allow nonlinear representations, as we see the parts and the whole at the same time, as images open up additional dimensions, something Prezi explores. Esposito in this chapter engages with new trends in digital humanities that often transform literary texts into pictures to make sense of the results of the intervening machinations of algorithms. She makes a useful distinction between illustration and visualization and focuses on the way texts are visualized. I took her book, I have a digital copy and as well as a printed copy, to Voyon, one of the sites she mentions that offers visualization of text. And having received that and put it through to see what Voyon produced. So what I found was, I got word clouds and loops and mandalas and bubble lines, and more of her book, to see. I did this to see if I learned anything new compared to what I did gathering information or doing it the old-fashioned way. So I'm sad to report that I did not learn anything new. I wanted this to work. Maybe I'm not trained to read these visualizations, or that these visualizations have only those who read the book in a particular way, or maybe the technology is just not there. But I wasn't very encouraged. But the pictures were very, very spectacular. Still, I recall the general objection of my colleague at UC San Diego, Rick Bielefeld, in his book, Reinventing Evidence. Can there be meaning in texts that lies beyond the natural human capacity to comprehend? At least in books written before these new technologies became available. To ask this differently, what kind of meaning or content can we find in algorithmic tools that humans cannot grasp without those tools in authored pieces of communication? Do algorithmic visualizations produce readings similar to, compatible with, or useful for human readings? Here, Esposito, who is overall skeptical of artificial intelligence, states several times that algorithms are not human intelligent and cannot read, still believes that algorithms can contribute to human readings. I generally agree, but how exactly and under what condition is not entirely clear to me. Still, what kinds of texts can benefit most from the results of machine processing? And can results of algorithmic processing bring truly novel understanding, or only illustrations of what humans already discovered? Would we ever accept algorithmic results, questioning our human understanding? Are they tools of discovery, or just tools of justification? Or are they creating an entirely new and different world of meaning, like putting a urinal in a museum, where the meaning is constructed even in opposition to its original signification? The following chapter is devoted to individualization. This is a brilliant short essay where Esposito unfurls the internal contradictions of algorithmic mass individualization. She describes with great subtlety the ways this offers more agency for us and more agency for corporate actors to limit our agency. She distinguishes between contextual, people in your situation, and behavioral, people like you, profiling, and how profiling reconfigures the public sphere. My favorite chapter is on memory and forgetting. Esposito observes that in human history up until now, the main problem was to retain information. With new technology, virtually everything can and will be committed to memory and digital memory. And suddenly, we can see how important forgetting is in our everyday life. To make sense of who we are and what we do, we have to be able to edit our memories, which means we must be able to delete details to hold on to others. Not just because our memory has limited storage capacity, but also because this is the only way to create meaning. Moreover, in a world where we cannot erase memories, the future becomes more and more shackled to the past, closing opportunities and ruling out radical changes. The dead hand of history becomes heavier and heavier. Esposito points out the asymmetry of remembering and forgetting. The second is subject to the excess of will paradox. We cannot intentionally forget while we can want to remember, and that forgetting is today achieved not by eliminating information, but by burying it in more information. Since it cannot be eliminated, memory must be made hard to retrieve. A big part of this memory is accumulating in the form of pictures. Esposito explains how picture taking becomes a replacement of and shield against real experiences. She traces this to a heightened sense of anxiety, characteristics of risk society. But this is quite plausible. I would make the case for a culprit that is older and burrowed deeper in our culture, capitalist modernity. Capitalism devalues the present and cultivates a future orientation. The present is an instrument towards a better future. Taking pictures for posting on social media fits into this pattern. You don't live in the present, you live in an imagined future, in this case, the imagined future of social approval. Instead of enjoying your view of the Grand Canyon, you snap a picture to enjoy the positive feedback from friends later, yet to come. This takes us back to editing of our experience. Editing the present is much harder than editing the future in our imagination. So placing something in the future increases our sense of control, even if it is out of our hands. The last essay is on prediction. Here, Esposito gives a peculiar reading of the rise of the importance and practice of prediction in our new algorithmic world. I agree with her that there are ironic parallels between old-fashioned divinatory practices and algorithmic predictions. In fact, some of those practices, such as augury or tarot card readings, are themselves algorithmic, in the sense that, unlike charismatic types of divination, such as prophecy or necromancy, they rely on rules that must be followed to gain the proper prediction. Overfitting that treats noise as signal is superstition scaled up by computers. Yet the novelty of algorithmic prediction, I would argue, is misconstrued in comparison with scientific predictions. Esposito is right that probability calculus was a step in the scientific revolution, but current algorithmic predictions are running on these very probability calculations. The seeming difference between probabilistic average versus individualistic prediction is a difference only in presentation. Algorithms make average predictions. Those may be more targeted, but are still averages that are later translated into a definite category, as opposed to a likelihood, by help of a decision rule, a cutoff rule. If the likelihood is more than a particular value between 0 and 1, we say A. If less than that, we say B. Statistical predictions are as much about the future as algorithmic predictions. A huge literature from the 1950s, in fact, argues that statistics is the only way to reliably predict the future. Statistical scientific analysis does not necessarily use experimental data. Most statistics, not just in the social, but also in the natural sciences, use observational data, like astronomy, climate science, or epidemiology. And representative sampling is not their concern. Performativity, that predictions shape and not just take a guess at the future, is not peculiar to algorithmic predictions. Robert Merton's famous article from 1948 on self-fulfilling and self-defeating prophecy is not about algorithmic or even statistical predictions. He talks about racial prejudice and also famously runs on that, predictions using human judgment, and the way prediction is processed by those involved in the prediction to become performative. The point of all this is that much of algorithmic prediction is simply scientific statistical probabilism on steroids. Galileo famously said that the book of knowledge is written in numbers. Algorithms and computers are just like the telescope, a new tool that gives us better access to this mathematical structure that undergirds the world. Not even the radical inductionism is terribly new. Tycho Brahe, Christian Huygens, and John Flamsteed were propelled by the same belief that letting their tool, the telescope, observe the heavens, they would get to the answers to the big questions of the cosmos. Finding patterns would eventually lead to scientific explanations. This takes me to the main key article, Clay, and this is where I'm going to conclude. artificial intelligence, according to the book, is a misnomer. What we term as such is really artificial communication. To make this claim, Esposito would need to say first what intelligence is, then show that what algorithms produce is not that. But she frustratingly never tells what intelligence is. She keeps pointing to the fact that the machine does things differently than humans. But that is why we have the qualifier artificial in AI. Or she claims that the machine does not do everything humans do, so its intelligence may be limited in some ways, but still can be intelligence. Esposito does define communication, but I'm not sure I follow her. She writes that she builds on Luhmann, who she writes refused to define communication in reference to conscious subjects. But then we learn in footnote 44 that Luhmann technically defined it as the unity of three selections: information, utterance, and understanding. There's a concept of communication without a conscious subject. There actually does exist a concept of communication with a conscious subject. That's the one that was developed by Norbert Wiener and his famous cybernetics and missile guidance system, and Claude Shannon, his information theory. The point is that intelligence is about content, and communication is about transmission of content. And the fact that algorithms are involved in the second does not mean it cannot produce the first, just like humans who can do both. Esposito observes correctly that AI produces content we call intelligent by combining and rearranging products of human intelligence. But new connections among socially produced knowledge is how humans produce intelligent content too. But intelligence is not just socially constructed, and this is my final point, but it is also distributed. People think with their brain, but also with their entire bodies, their non-human environment, be it their books, wonderful books like this one that we are talking about, desks, pencils and papers, their built environment, maps, slide rulers, and yes, their smartphones and computers. In this sense, even human intelligence is artificial. So I just would like to thank Elena for this wonderful book, and I really made me think about lots of things. If I had another 10 minutes, I will also talk about time and how time is handled in these predictions, but I don't have any more time, so I am going to end on this note. Thank you so much.
It's up to me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Noortje. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Alberto, thank you, Arcos. First of all, it's always moving and impressive when you see the people reading your book with such attention to the details, and you have your thoughts coming back in the same and different form. It's simply a fascinating experience. So I thank you really so much. And of course, I took a lot of notes, and I think I can refer to a very limited part of them, because you mentioned so many topics. And I will, in both cases, concentrate to the point that seems to me the most important one, and I have to disregard a lot of other stimuli, but I hope we'll have other opportunities. I start with Arcos, because I think that's the most, divergence in the way you understand some things. And your points are all fascinating and right, but can you hear me? Yeah, I would like to try to make some of the points that are focal for me, and on which we sort of have a different understanding. First, the reason to shift from intelligence to communication, and you rightly remark that I never define intelligence. And so that should be a weakness of my account. And actually, one of the reasons why I decided to shift from communication, from intelligence to communication, is that the same reason. Because my point was, since 70 years, we try to reproduce, to build with machine artificial intelligence since the Dartmouth conference, then 1957. And the idea that the whole development of computer digitalization was led by the hope to reproduce artificial, whatever we can, digitally, or how we want to call them, human intelligence. And my point was exactly your point, that we don't know what intelligence is. So it seems to be a strange project to try to reproduce with technological tools something we don't know how to define. Not only the metaphor has been brought farther and farther because it was in the debate in the 70s, the 80s, and then recently now with neural networks, the point has not only been to reproduce the mind or the consciousness, but in many cases even to reproduce the brain. And if we don't know how intelligence works, what the mind is, we still don't know how the brain works. We don't know how neurons work. And the idea so I think that the project was sort of strange from the very beginning. And if something is strange, for me as a sociologist, I tend to ask why we do something strange. People are not stupid. So I want the reason why this project was, still is fascinating. So the reason to shift to communication is, I think we know about communication much more than what we know about intelligence. And you're right, I refer to Niklas Luhmann, and that's a sort of idiosyncratic, but I think for me, very productive way of defining communication, whereby communication doesn't rely on intelligence. So we have a proposal, system theory, that defines communication without the need to know what intelligence is. So I have to say a little about Luhmann, which is not exactly the content of my book, but is the background from which my idea come. And Luhmann's idea is, we refer rightly to Shannon and Weaver and the general idea of the communication that we have. Basically, all theories of communication adopt more or less a Shannon and Weaver approach, by which communication is, the model, there's a source, there's a receiver, and there's a channel in between, and there's an information moving from the source to the receiver, and there's noise, there's coding, decoding, there are more and more complex things to think and account. But communication is successful if possibly as much as possible, of the information that the source put in the channel arrives to the receiver. So the unity of, as you said rightly, transmission. There's something which is transmitted, people say like an aqueduct, as a water metaphor. There's something that moves from here to there, and the most water comes from here to there, the better communication. And this is, of course, the process that we can go into detail, relies on intelligence, relies on sharing of thoughts. Because in the model, what moves is not water, but are the thoughts of the source. They are put into the channel, and they should move into the thoughts of the receiver. And the more the thoughts are identical, the more communication is successful. I think it's not realistic, and I think Luhmann first said it's not realistic, because what happens in communication, nothing is transmitted from the source to the receiver, first for a very simple reason, but that's an easy one. In water, if water moves from here to there, the water is not here anymore. While the miracle of communication, and that's new information produced everywhere without the source losing anything. The water is here and the water is there at the end. There's more water altogether. But that was not even water, because what was water here is not the water that is there. It's simply completely different. When communication works, if communication is successful, there was someone, the source, well, actually, Luhmann starts from the receiver, actually, but the receiver gets from what is said an information which is his information, which is his or her thought, which is not comparable with the thought with anyone else. There's no unity produced here and there, because if you understand what I'm saying now, you don't get my thoughts. My thoughts remain my thoughts, and you produce thoughts which I don't even know. See, communication sparkles different thoughts in all the people participating in communication, and these thoughts are unique, different from each of us, and not compared, not transmitted from one or the others. So that's why, going back to our point, for this idea of communication, intelligence is not required. Well, intelligence is required. We are intelligent beings. And by being intelligent, we produce something with, which sparkles other intelligence somewhere else, but which itself is not intelligent. It's not our thought that get into the communication. Communication makes us intelligent. And we couldn't be intelligent without communication. Mowgli would be an idiot in real point. So you cannot become intelligent without participation in communication, but communication itself is not made of intelligence. That's not me, that's Luhmann. Sorry for this long Luhmann, you tell me how much point I have. But that's the background of the idea of the way I said intelligence is not required. And as I said, I found the fact that we have been talking about artificial intelligence for 70 years fascinating, because I think we are not stupid. Why did we do that? Because up to now, and so we go to our point now, up to now, communication always required the participation of intelligence. Communication is not intelligent, but we have to have intelligent people saying something and intelligent people understanding something in their own way. So we said, if now computer, which they actually are able to do now, are able to produce information, each of us. We communicate, we talk with Siri, we communicate, we play with social video games. We get information from the web, and in many cases, our partners are bots without us even being aware that they are bots. So the Turing test have been passed at machine every day since a long time. So the machines are actually able to act as communication partner. So we say then they have to become intelligent, to be intelligent. And in my understanding, not necessarily, because since I start from a Luhmannian background, to be able to sparkle in us this ability to produce intelligent thought doesn't mean they have to be intelligent. So I think the starting idea of the book was, what can we see in the social reality where algorithms, let's say, not now computer, are participating more and more in our production information? How can we see it in a different way if we abandon the idea of that this machine have to reproduce more or less adequately our intelligence, but we shift to a different approach? And that's 5 minutes, yeah. That's the background on which I will quickly answer some of the questions. Very quickly, a couple of points by Akos, and I go to Noortje. For example, the question about, all my examples tried use of lists, use of visualization and digital humanities, understanding of forgetting and remembering, and the very tricky, for me, fascinating issue of prediction. I tried to apply this program and say, how can we see in the way the machine works if we don't start from the idea you have to be intelligent, but do something different? So lists are, of course, you can use abstraction lists, but you don't have to, because the list works just a position, or how computer algorithm in many cases found patterns, found correlation. I mean, you don't need to understand the correlation if you find the algorithm find these patterns and they present it to us, and we can make sense of them. They don't have to make sense of them if they find these structural similarities in the case of the list. And for example, the question of the digital humanities, so-called distant reading, the idea that algorithms can read. You rightly remarked that the algorithms don't read, but they contribute to reading, which seems like a paradox. But what I have in mind is something actually basic, quite simple. The people in the digital humanities are using algorithms to analyze text. They put Franco Moretti's kind of things. They put thousands of text into the algorithms, and algorithm finds patterns that become informative for the user, for the reader. And well, I find it very nice that you put my book into Voyant, but the idea is that the machine produces some patterns that told nothing to you, which I'm not surprised. It's only one book. It should be read, actually. But if you have thousands of books, that maybe the algorithm finds some similarity, correlation about the books that what Franco Moretti says, that no human beings could have found and become informative. You never thought about, because nobody can read a million texts. But the algorithm finds some patterns that then the reader can interpret and get some new information. So that would be the idea of interpreting that. And so it's very similar also to about prediction, but I would like to go on with that, but I had to use my time to answer Noortje's so really important also questions. I don't know how to start. I just mentioned a couple of times, a couple of points. Failures. Failures, right. They are, of course. So algorithms fail in many, many cases. No? And what I'm interested in is, as you definitely certainly remarked, you are right, the algorithm can be wrong, but they can be wrong even if we work right. In many cases of the algorithm where we find failures by algorithms, for example, the algorithm that, or take that, the algorithm that's infamous, horrible example, the algorithm classify colored people as gorillas or something. No? That's horrible and it's wrong. But algorithm worked fine. The algorithm followed this instruction. It came to something which for us is completely not acceptable, but the algorithm probably followed all the steps in the correct way. So in most cases, the failure is not that the machine fails, but even the right results of the algorithms are in many cases absolutely not something we can take and use. So the question is, the failures in many cases are good results of algorithm cannot be used without checking a lot of things. So what worries me is not so much when the algorithms are wrong, but where the algorithms work perfectly fine and the results are really, really dangerous to use. So the question of bias that you mentioned, or my project works, for example, on predictive policing, and in many, many cases, has been demonstrated that the algorithm predict correctly where crime is right. Like in many cases, they make mistakes. We can look at that. But in other cases, they predict correctly where crime is going to be produced, and by using the algorithm, crime increases. Because even the right results of algorithm cannot be used in our social life. That's why we need sociologists working on algorithm, observe what's going on. Because the correct results of algorithm can be really, really not correct to use without knowing what the context is. So I agree with you, but two, which was the point? Agency. That's I think that's the most important one that you mentioned. Are algorithms communication partners? And if we mean they are communication partners, do we mean they have agency? Alberto knows it. That's a very tricky issue. In my understanding, I'm not sure, but my feeling is I would definitely say algorithms are not communication partner in terms of alter ego. If I communicate with you, you are an alter ego. I respect my perspective in yours and so on. And algorithms are not alter egos. So the idea, if they are communication partners, we have to accept or to work towards the idea of communication partners that don't necessarily have to be alter egos. So, and that how agency means in this case is a completely open issue and it's something new dealing with new algorithms. But the reason why, nevertheless, I think it can be useful to consider them communication partners is that there is something that happens in our social life that, in my understanding, cannot be understood, cannot be described without attributing it some way or the other, maybe not an agency to the algorithms. Because the algorithms produce, think about the example of digital reading or our interaction with bots and so on. They produce something that comes into our communication circuits and that consequences. In my project we also work about medicine. there's something that changes the communication about doctors and the way they deal with machines, with the illnesses and so on, had very, very concrete concepts. Or we work about insurance, and the field of insurance changed dramatically because of the way how algorithms process information. And this information cannot be attributed to anyone else than the machine, because the designer didn't know the information. The people who put the source, the data into that the algorithm use, didn't know this information. The information that becomes information for us, not for the machine, exists only if you consider how the machine elaborates it and produces something which has to be attributed to the machine. If that is agency or not, that we have to discuss, and I think it can be different from case to case. But what I'm interested in is simply empirically the phenomenon. That's something we have to face in many aspects of our life, of information affecting our society in a very deep, important, relevant way that cannot be attributed to anyone else than the machine. And my proposal is just, let's try to find a way to describe what's going on. And my proposal is understand as a communication. It probably has to be revised. We have to discuss many uncertain points about that. But what I want to deal with is, I think, as the important social problems we have to deal now.
Yes, thank you very much, both the critics and the author. We still have 20 minutes, so I would like to open the forum. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thanks for the presentation, also the book. So, yeah, I always like the painting when the Plato points to the ideal and Aristotle point to the concrete ideas. So, my question is, we all know those different algorithms actually invented by those big firms to solve the specific questions. Coincidentally, I worked at this kind of algorithm when I work in the IT firms. Typical example, in the real life, our face is quite big, but every time we communicate through the mobile phone or the computer, the screen is small. So we have to transfer the real image to the screen. So a lot of engineering is just work on the algorithm to actually make the face look slightly thinner, so looks more beautiful. So many firms do a lot of R&D to do this kind of algorithm. Instagram, the Burton model she cited is purely Google to invent it to answer the question. So all those algorithms, we know that those big firms to train them, teach them to solve a specific problem. So is it really possible to bundle all those different algorithms to treat them as a homogeneous one, to say as like artificial communication, same? Or if it is possible, then it's just coincidence, or it's just like, is it because it's so complex we have to put it as artificial communication? Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much.
I would like to. That's of course it's a very important point. You are perfectly right, and I didn't explain that, but I think the point is there's something in Bielefeld. We collaborate very strongly with the computer scientists, and the project relies on continuous exchange with the people working. Myself, I cannot program, but they can, and so we try to exchange ideas and projects. And the feeling is, you tell me if it corresponds to what you say, that in the last 15 years, something had happened. Because, of course, algorithm exists since the 17th century. So it's nothing new. It's sort of imprecise to talk about algorithms. And artificial intelligence, this project exists in 70 years. So what's new now? Why do we talk about something different now? And the people working there confirmed to me that since 15 years, more or less, there's something difference that also partly responds to a point that Akos was rightly making. all these people working with the algorithm are trained in statistics, the informatics, they work with digital tools. Since, well, let's say, 15 years, the field of people working with informatics has been divided into two groups. People still work with, let's say, a lot of computer, but with more or less traditional statistical tools, and people working with machine learning and big data. Because, and the community, the tribe, they say, of the machine learners is becoming more and more divided from the tribes of people working with statistics, because they simply have different research programs, different tools, different interests. And people working machine learning think about deep learning, and they very often use big data. So machine learning tools, deep learning, require big data to be really effective. And big data are completely different data than the data being traditionally used by statistics. In statistics, you need garbage in, garbage out. You need data that have been selected, cleaned, protected, processed, and prepared, in many cases sampled, to get results that become relevant and reliable. While with machine learning, you have other control procedures, but basically you use big data. Doesn't mean, of course, all the data of the universe, but use all the data you have available in a certain phenomenon. There can be very many, there can be less numerous, but in any case, you use all of them without sampling, in many cases without cleaning them very much, and you just process all this data with algorithms that in many cases learn by themselves, and more and more often learn by themselves in ways that tend to be intransparent even to the designers, and produce results that are of a different structure than the ones before. And that's the point where I think it's clear that the question is no more intelligence, but rather communications. Because this way of processing data is something that, well, people say now machines have become intelligent, but what we see is the machine now work in a way that don't even try to reproduce the form of our human intelligence. They find patterns that nobody can understand. They don't follow rules. They cannot, in many cases, cannot explain how the machine works, and the explanation would be understandable for us. It's a different way of processing data, which in many, many cases is, well, I say successful, but it's very effective.
Can I enjoy the discussion, because I also some points about, I just mentioned one. That is about your distinction between illustration and visualization. That is, in my opinion, really convincing. If I understand your argument correctly, you say that there is a distinction between illustration and visualization, because in the case of visualization, you can get some new information. I mean, illustration is just to show information that is already there. In a sense, it is not at all information, because it's just what I already know. If I'm able to discover something new, then it's sort of new information. So that is the property of data visualization. So I was wondering what is new about that. I mean, because if we take a look at statistics, in the 17th century, Leibniz already was really let's say, really happy to see that statistics could be used to process a lot of data and to summarize this data on a table. And table is already kind of data, let's say, not data illustration, but data visualization. And also Leibniz said that the very advantage was that you can have an overview over a lot of data, and you can get new information, so discover emergent properties, which are very instrumental for politicians. Because the politicians which are carrying on a sort of a social policy can get an insight into what is going on in the country without asking people, and without looking too many data, because they get everything in a table. So my question is, do you see some connection between statistics? Because also algorithm, as was already mentioned, use statistical methods and tools. So do you see some connection, and what is new, or what is the difference between data visualization, digital visualization, and statistics, statistical table?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. But at the first step, I would say, no, there's nothing new. But that's what makes me think interesting, because the distinction between illustration and visualization is old, both in the field of image processing, also in the philosophical field. The idea that illustration, you have a picture illustrating something that you write down there. You have a picture illustrating what we are expressing even in words, or is illustrated, or visualization. You show a picture, and the people can get from the picture something they have in mind. So the picture can convey much more information than the one you can describe in words. And the people can get the information, can get from the picture information you are not aware of. That can be statistics, why they are so effective, but it can be on our way of using photographs. So let's just say you want to explain something to a friend. You can use words, and you describe how a building looks. And you describe it's look there. It's a yellow building with black square windows and something black in front. And I describe only what I am aware of. If I take a picture and show the picture of the person, there's much more that I'm aware. And the picture can get more information that I have in mind, and also information I was not aware of. But there's something well known since long. No? But the argument here was actually very simple. That since visualization images, in statistics or otherwise, can be used to convey information which possibly the sender was not aware of, that's interesting to see how algorithms, the results of algorithms that of which the sender, the algorithm, was not aware, they don't have any information. But they hope that the person, our hope, that by looking at the visualized result of the process of algorithm, we can get information. That's why people work with algorithms resort more and more often to visualization. My initial question was, why are visualization so much used since in the last 15 years? For example, in the digital humanities, the results are always visualized. And digital humanities are textual disciplines. So they talk, they write, and now they process the things, and the result of distant reading is always shown with images. So I asked why. And the proposal was because images has these features. With images, you can, prompt the production of information that you are not aware of. So that's why algorithms tend to use images.
Yeah.
Akos, this is David Stark. You can't see me, so know who's speaking. So I had some notes as Akos was talking, and there were 3 or 4 points that were very sharp, and I'll mention 2 of them because I'm wondering, Elena, if you would respond to them, because there were so many things that you couldn't. So I'll help you with 2. That one is the one that Akos ended with, and he said, even human intelligence is artificial. Mm-hmm. So I took it from your answer to, from some of the things you said, actually, in answering some other things, I could infer a response. But I'm wondering what you think. The second was, I think if I have it right, Akos, she said, machine learning, artificial intelligence, I might put words in your mouth if I say predictive analytics, but is just statistics on steroids. It's all about averages anyway. I think I got it. Elena, what do you say to that? I want to make it sharp because it's a clear, Akos made his points very directly. I'm really curious what you say.
Thank you.
So yes, that is precise. It is basically function fitting, right? So you're fitting functions to data. And what is really revolutionary is that now we have these fantastic functions that no human was able to calculate with pen and paper, but now the computers can do. So that's Yeah.
No. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. There are difficult points, but they're very important points, and I actually should say something on that. No? Even intelligence is artificial. Right, absolutely. And I think the example I said, the stupid example about Mowgli, goes in this direction. So human intelligence is not natural. The question is, of course, how we define artificial. No? But if the artificial is something which is not natural, that doesn't require any social or human effort to be produced, human intelligence is definitely artificial. So what is the point now, artificial communication? Actually, this artificial communication, we discussed it with Alberto and Giancarlo quite a lot, because on the one hand, it's sort of redundant, because all communication is artificial. Because communication requires it's something socially produced. There's no natural communication without any social intervention. But what I mean, what the reason to propose the qualifier artificial with communication is that it's not only that the communication is artificial, but in that point, the communication partner is artificial. The communication partner is something which has been produced as a unit by our society, by statistical tools, by digital tools, and so on. And that, I think, is something new. Because, of course, we can get information from many tools. An example we often make, I can get information every day from my watch. I know now that I learn from my watch, it's almost time to wrap up. But I don't attribute this information to my watch. But the information I get from my communication part as an algorithm, I attribute it to algorithms. And I think that's a new dimension of artificiality, which we didn't have before. Quick answer. Prediction is a statistic on steroid. Sure, and not. It's partly the answer I gave to the colleague there, because, of course, what they are doing is statistics using other tools. But these tools make a difference, because, as I said, that's why the community of machine learners becomes more and more separated from the community of statisticians, because they have other problems and other solutions. For example, certainly the debate about explanation and prediction, the debate about causality and correlation, they look at different things. If you want, that's why machine learning in many cases is focused on prediction, not on explanation, because if you have good correlations, you can predict even if you cannot explain. Then you have to check how the prediction, if and how the prediction is correct. But you can predict in many cases. You don't have time to find explanation. You have a prediction, you just act. Think in the medical field or in other emergencies, use the prediction. Of course, with some warranty, the prediction is going to be completely random and so on. So there is something really going a different way. And I think the point that also David had in mind, I think it's a really, from my research, it's really dramatic difference. The prediction that you get with predictive analytics or with the algorithmic tools are individual predictions. I think you said they are average. Well, they use averages, but the prediction is for that data set, for that problem in this moment. And if you want to produce, you want to have a prediction about my health with my data today, if you want to have the same, another prediction for Alberto, you have to run the entire things completely. So you use the result that you had is individualized. It's not an average. And so people say if you need a population using with tools, you have to aggregate these results. We are all individual, and you construct a population afterwards. While statistics works in a completely different way, because we have the results that you get by statistics are average and refer to average of the population. In the population, on average, people have 1.4 children. Nobody has 1.4 children, but the population has it. And if you want to become more precise, you have to segment the population more and more and more, as people are doing in insurance, to get more precise results. Algorithms do the opposite. You start from the individual, and then the question is how and which tool you can generalize these individual results. So that's why I think it's, of course, all people study the same things, they all use computer, they all use statistical tools. But I see a discontinuity in the way how algorithms are used in many fields.
Okay, because we started a little bit later, we have maybe a couple of minutes for the last question or commentaries. Yeah.
Well, I'm somewhat puzzled about the direction of the conversation, and I thought I might briefly say why I think I'm puzzled, which is that the debate about machine intelligence and the debate about how machine learning predicts are debates that operate within a scientific frame very often. They presume scientific methodology as the frame. Now, I thought that when sociologists reframe these systems as forms of social communication, that we start asking different sets of questions and focus on different kinds of effects. So for instance, I'll just give one example. If you take the rise of fintech and digital payment, we can talk about pattern recognition in financial transaction data and how digital payment systems make possible different ways of doing pattern recognition on transaction data. But one of the effects is less and less ATM machines. It becomes harder and harder for people who live in a cash economy to operate in society. So I feel that the notion of artificial communication, focusing on communication process in society, it places a kind of obligation of us to revalue again what are the effects that matter and that don't matter. Because of course, for those who are interested in financial pattern recognition, whether there's problems for the cash economy, I mean, it only matters under very specific conditions.
No,
so just, I want to ask you about that.
In that case, the question, my answer is easy. I agree 100%. So I don't think the question is, first of all, a scientific question. We are sociologists. We move in our university context. Of course, we have our perspective. But for example, I can take an example of my own research. We have this project on prediction. We work on three fields: insurance, medicine, and policing. They are not science. The relevance of the question we are investigating is not scientific. For example, the neutral one, the most neutral is insurance, and we want to see which kind of discrimination are happening. If you have really personalized insurance and the focus on the right profile of risk for a person, seems that you pay the price for the insurance that corresponds precisely to your individual risk profile, not to the one of other people where the segmentation puts you in. What does it mean? It means that really the most simple way to put it, that really the people who need insurance more, who have a higher risk profile, cannot never afford it. And how are we dealing with that? With many really interesting subtle other questions. So the relevance, the point of artificial communication is, first of all, not scientific, it's social. Of course, my perspective is scientific, the only way I can work. But think about I just mentioned the field of predictive policing. The relevance of the urgency of the point is not first scientific, it's just social. I definitely agree.
So there would be a lot of other points, but unfortunately time is over. Elena, thank you again for this terrifically interesting book. Thank you, Noortje, and thank you, Akos, for your commentaries and your contribution. I just remind that so the topic is open topic, and so it's a topic for the future, and there is a lot of stuff that we could go on discussing about it. But I just remind you that the book is available on open access. So we hope that it was instrumental to present the book, just to start a sociological discussion about algorithm and the use of algorithm in everyday life. Thank you all, and stay safe.
Thanks so much. Thank you.